Hey guys, it's Tim, the Lockpicking Patrolman, and this is our third episode on picking the American 1100 series padlocks. And last time I explained some equipment selection, what type of pick you wanted, and also what type of tensioner you wanted to try to use. Now let's talk about some other ways you can pick this lock. Obviously, there are two ways to pick padlocks. There is the realistic way where you hold it in your hand, just as you would if it was locked on, say, a locker or a chain. Obviously, lock sport, we don't pick locks that are in use. You should never, ever do that. That is always against the rules to pick locks that are in use, even if they do belong to you, unless if you're willing to cut that lock and take it completely out of service, just because there is a possibility that you can mess it up. Obviously, if the lock doesn't belong to you, then it's just plain illegal. So we can simulate the pick resistance of this lock, though, just by holding it in our hand or by doing some videos like I did last year. But when you hold it in your hand to pick, the first thing is you want to orient the pins the way that you're comfortable with. In Europe, people mostly pick with the pins down because most locks are mounted with the pins down. Not quite sure if I've ever picked a lock like that before, or at least one of these in hand before like this. I'd probably use a little different technique. However, for these, the purposes of this video, we're going to pick pin side up. And again, we want to use this tensioner, pry bar tensioner. And like I discussed, we'll insert the long end into the top of the keyway. And then you sort of use your finger to guide the tension while you pick. And you would go in and pick and adjust your tension with pressure on your finger. But these locks can be pretty tricky to tension, and especially when you're first learning how to pick them, if you've never picked one before. Now, for the first year that I was in lock sport, I didn't have a vise. And when I finally got one, it just amazed me that it made it so much easier to pick a lot of locks, even locks I didn't have really any difficulty in picking before. Having that mounted in a vise like this made it 10 times easier. So if you're learning how to pick these for the first time, it's okay to put it in a vise. You're not trying to simulate being in real world conditions. You're not trying to put it to the test. You're trying to solve the puzzle of how this lock opens without using the key. That's the whole fun of lock sport. Is these are tiny, tiny mechanical puzzles. And of course you can use the cheat, which is to put your key in and unlock it. But being lock sporters, we like to unlock it without the key, of course. So here are a few tips of picking this in the vise. If you've got one of these locks and it's just giving you a really hard time, here's my suggestion. Put it in your vise, take the key, if you have the key for it, take the key and unlock it. You can see back here the shackle is free to move. I'm going to take the key out. These aren't key retaining typically, but in the very back of this lock is the little actuator, and it does have spring tension on it. There is some of that spring tension that is relayed up through the plug of the lock core. After a while, it doesn't really play into picking all the time. But when you're first learning how to pick these, it really can. And some of the clones, like the Ace Hardware locks or the Brinks that also use the same design in the lock core, can have really, really strong spring tension sometimes. So this gives you a nice floppy core. Put your tensioner in there and going to adjust the camera angle so you guys can see a little bit better what I'm doing with my fingers. You put the tensioner in there, and you can see how it flops back and forth. And that's typical. It's a little bit of play because of the way that the core sits inside of the body. There's going to be a little bit of movement of this top part, the Bible. It's going to move just a little bit, but not quite so much. So a lot of that movement, though, is the security pins and spools. Now, I use heavy tension on a lot of locks because heavier tension gives you better feedback of each pin and also allows you to prevent oversetting the pins. Remember how I talked about pushing that first pin up in the core too far and blocking all my efforts? Well, that's an overset. So what I like to do is I think of my tensioner as a clutch. Just if you're driving a standard transmission car. So there are times that you want to push down fully on the clutch. There are times that you want to release it completely. You can vary the amount of tension that you use in a lock. And when you start to get comfortable with these, you can actually use a combination of your pick and just easing and rocking that core back and forth a little bit just to get a set. So, go back and watch a video that I did. I will put the link to it below in this video on a video that I made a while back on tensioning locks. And I probably need to update it a little bit, but it gets the gist across. So what we're going to do is put our tensioner in here, and you can push the tensioner forward enough just that it takes the slack out of that core. In other words, when you reach in, you can see I can wiggle that core back and forth with just the pick. When I put the tensioner in, I want to apply just enough pressure that I have to actually ease off of it to rotate that core back with the pick. Then, after I've got that slack out of it, I want to give it just a bit more, just so it feels solid. In other words, take your pick, put it in there, try to rotate it. Don't bend your pick or break your pick. But just enough to where you can't casually rotate it back against your thumb. You want just enough pressure to where you can't do that. Tensioning pressures and force are something that are very difficult to describe in lock force videos because to one person, a light touch could be, the blow of a hammer to another person. So that's the way I like to gauge it, is enough to where I can't easily, rotate that core back against without easing up pressure in my tensioning hand. The next thing that you're going to do is go through and you want to feel each of the pins. Now, when you're feeling for these pins and finding their location inside of the lock, keep in mind that the first pin sits very close to where the tip of your tensioner is going to be. In other words, with this in the lock, the end of your pick is going to come right up here, right there, to engage that number one pin. And a lot of times when you're starting out, you will feel your tensioner right here feel the tip of your pick right here on your tensioner, and then you'll move in and you'll move right past that first pin. So if you're having a hard time setting the first pin, take the end of your hook, slide it along your tensioner, and go right up behind it, and that will help you lift that first pin. So anyway, guys, next video, I'm going to show you actually what to look for as far as feedback in these locks, what to listen for as well, and how to get one of these guys open. So anyway, any questions or comments, please leave them below. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, stay out of trouble, and we'll see you next time.